This talk will be concerned with security and networks. We'll start by looking at the integrity of data. This means that data cannot be altered or defaced or lost during transmission. In other words, what is sent out is what is received. If it is altered during transmission, say by an intervening program such as a virus, then its integrity has been attacked. The same data has not been received as was intended. So it's important that computer systems should maintain the integrity of the data flows, the information flows that they are responsible for. Integrity applies to intentional and unintentional loss or damage. It could be that the data is sent from one machine to another over a network, that it does not receive the same information because there was an intentional change in the data as a consequence of using the network, or a change which could be anticipated as a consequence of using the network. Or it could be unintentional. It could be that some agency, so for example a virus, attacks the data, alters the data in some way, and means that the recipient is not getting what was intended by the sender. Ensuring data integrity means that all processes in the information chain are monitored and checked for accuracy. All the processes should be transparent. They should be clear to the recipient and to the sender what was intended and what was received. So it should be possible to monitor the data flows. It should be possible to trace out the network moving from one machine to the next, and to see if there was any corruption in the data, what was the likely source of that corruption. Therefore, it's important to have an auditing process to check that the data trail of transactions and transmissions, to ensure that the data integrity is done with accuracy. So an auditing process means that what was sent and what was received should correspond. There should be some sort of way of checking it. Perhaps the receiver could send back some sort of program, some verification program to the sender to say that a checksum had a certain value, or some piece of information had a certain value, and it's possible to check it against the information that was originally sent. So there may be possibilities of the sender and the receiver collaborating in a toing and froing of information to see that the information was accurately sent and received. In other words, that there was integrity in the data. Now viruses, well, viruses are probably one of the major causes, I should say, of data destruction and corruption. The origins of viruses really rests in the minds of certain individuals. Some people like to write programs to cause destruction and harm, and annoy and frustrate computer systems users. As to why the people want to behave like that, it's difficult to say, and we really need to look to other subjects, for example psychology or criminology or one of these areas, to try and determine why people would want to do this. But what we do know is that there are viruses, so let's start from that point. And the viruses are dedicated to the destruction and corruption of data. There is also a fear of viruses, and this also causes a lack of confidence in electronic processes, and it inhibits the development of the network. People are worried about viruses, so they want to revert back to something more traditional. When a computer system is attacked by viruses, then the users of that system want to go back perhaps to using paper, because at least paper was dependable. The scale of the internet allows viruses to hide, and the complexity of electronic relationships makes detection difficult. The internet is a vast network of computers and servers and users, and it's vast, it's global, so it's easy to hide viruses. They become concealed in programs, they are distributed globally, and they're programmed perhaps to attack certain computers or to attack certain pieces of software or certain types of files. We'll talk about the types of viruses in a few moments, but essentially it's very difficult to track down the viruses. A computer virus is defined as, or by, its ability to replicate itself. That's the problem with viruses. They can replicate themselves. We start with one and it replicates itself, or in this case it duplicates itself. We've got 2, and then they replicate and we've got 4 and 8 and so on. And as it spreads throughout the network, which could be throughout the internet, we get a vast number of these viruses, all programmed to attack certain programs or certain computers or certain institutions. But they do need a host. They need to be carried. They can't find their way around on their own. So they use computer networks and facilities to give them a place to exist, give them an abode, give them a home. So the viruses replicate themselves, but they do need a host. They do need to be carried. They are a virus. Worms are a particular type of nuisance. These are not viruses under the definition, since they can propagate and exist independently. Worms are a particular type of virus, if you like, that they can propagate themselves and exist independently. So they don't need the backup that other viruses require. Viruses can occur everywhere in a computer, in the boot sector, when the computer is starting up, in the FAT, which is the file allocation table. The file allocation table is what allocates the files on a hard drive. It's what manages the hard drive. Well, if there's a virus and it attacks the FAT system, then the hard drive becomes useless, and all the data on the hard drive becomes useless. But they could also attack types of programs, executable programs, for example, EXEs, or communications type programs, or any type. They can run across, they can be targeted at any type of program, and they pick up the types of program by the extension. Programs have extensions to tell computers what type of applications they need to run. And the viruses can be very big, or they can be very, very small. They can be very sophisticated or very simple. But what they have all got in common is they're simply a nuisance. They're a costly nuisance. Viruses may be classified under various headings, and what we're doing here is painting a moving picture, because our definitions and our thinking about viruses is changing all the time. So in a few years' time, this will need to be updated and look at more current thinking about viruses. But for the moment, they may be classified under various headings. Generally speaking, the classification method is based on the path used to replicate the viruses and the type of system that's infected. So, for example, a boot virus. These infect the boot sector of a floppy disk, if there is such a thing, or there could be a CD, which is used for for booting up a system that could be infected, or a DVD, or it could exist on a memory stick which is used for booting up. It could be on the hard drive itself. It could be on a partition in the hard drive. They move the boot block to another location. That's what they do. They move the information in the boot sector of the device, the sector that's needed to start up the computer. They move that to a different location. So when the computer starts up, it can't find the software to boot itself, to get started. In other words, the machine is useless. It's useless because the data has been moved. The virus has moved the data on the medium that's been used, the CD, the DVD, the memory stick, on the hard drive itself. The data has been moved, so therefore the system can't start up. File viruses, which attack, for example, different types of files. The exe, the executable files, were most attacked some years back and tend to be a favorite amongst the people who write viruses. They usually attack the virus code to the file, thus rendering it inoperable. So the virus attacks the file itself. It attacks the structure of the file. It may alter extensions of certain files that are needed, or it may move some of the files, or it may simply delete some files, some critical files. One way or the other, it destroys the file, and therefore that file is no longer available to the user. And that file could be a very important file that starts up a major application. The exe file is an important file that starts the whole system. There are also multi-partile viruses. These infect both the boot sector and executable files. They're more opportunistic. They are a bit more sophisticated in some respects because they attack the boot sector and the executable files. So if for any reason they're not able to attack the boot sector, they've still got the option of attacking the executable files and rendering the system useless. Systematic files attack systems that are used to run the operating system. So a computer running Windows may be attacked by a virus that targets that particular version of Windows. It attacks Linux. Oddly enough, Apple tends to be not immune from this, but the Apple have got very tight security and very restricted use by the user of critical files. So therefore access to those files are restricted, so Apple tends to be a bit more secure. But Windows users and Linux, particularly Windows, systematic files may be placed that will attack the operating system. Polymorphic files. These attack the integrity of the operating system in business computers and servers. These are used mostly on LANs and on servers. It could be servers on the internet are attacked in this way. What they do is they move around the data again. They corrupt the data. They may implant extra files or delete certain key files, again rendering the system useless. Stealth viruses conceal their existence and then modify file structures to conceal additional code added to the files. These are stealth viruses. They're, if you like, secret viruses. They amend the code on files. They add extra lines, which distorts the usage of the file or renders the file inoperable. You can't use the file because the structure has changed, or it just simply adds some more information to the file so that the results that were expected are not what is received. When the file finally starts up, it goes to someplace else, or it performs a different function. It behaves differently than expected. And metafiles, these use languages in power programs like Microsoft Word to damage existing files and new files as they are created. So sometimes metafiles may use existing files in operating systems or in particular applications, and it uses the files and combines the files in certain ways, or parts of those files in certain ways, to make new files, renames the new files to make them look like they're part of the operating system or of that particular application. And of course, because the file has been generated almost randomly from other bits of code on the system itself, the system cannot deal with that particular file, which means either the system does not boot up, it doesn't start, or if it's an application, it malfunctions, it falls apart. And the real danger with all of these viruses is that they may replicate themselves. Once the virus has found a format that means it works as a virus, it can then replicate itself. People send information to each other, to send emails to each other. The virus may conceal itself and jump from one computer to the next, thereby infecting large sections of the internet. Virus infection is not always obvious, since the viruses behave in an exponential way. It's difficult to predict the way the viruses move. They can jump from one machine to the other because we share information. As we share information, we may also be sharing viruses. And therefore, if we, the users, are in a lot of contact, which we are, it's the internet, if we're in a lot of contact, the viruses can jump very fast between systems, between computer systems, and therefore increase exponentially. In fact, initially they spread quite quickly, then they reach saturation and then slow down. They slow down because the people who are sending the viruses unintentionally, no malice, they're just sending files to each other, but they're also sending the virus not knowingly. At some stage those people will be out of the system because their systems are broken, and therefore viruses tend to slow down after a period of time. But of course by that stage most of the damage is done. Computer systems are wrecked, are destroyed. Companies that rely on computer systems need to implement a policy of regular virus checking and positive steps to avoid infections, such as restricting use exclusively for business uses. It's not often understood by employees why employers are so strict about the type of sites that may be visited by employees in the business. But once an employee is behind a firewall, the business firewall, if that employee starts to access sites that may pass on viruses, the whole business is under risk. The data in the business may be attacked. The whole structure of the business could be destroyed. Business planning, the accounts, production systems, store records, employee data, everything may be destroyed. So it's important to control what can be accessed from inside the business. Probably the safest way of dealing with this is to have two systems. One system which accesses the internet and access outside information, and then a physical break to the internal network, which is the secure network of that system. But that's very difficult to do in practice, because sometimes companies communicate with each other using the internet, so the possibility is always there. The use of a good antivirus package, signing up to a good antivirus provider, is a good start, because at least some viruses can be discovered before they do any damage, or some files may be spotted as potentially dangerous. So antivirus is very important in controlling the flow of viruses. A common source of viruses is cracked software disks. People steal software. Many shops sell it on DVD or in CDs in certain areas in certain parts of the world, and it's possible to buy, let's say, Microsoft Office very cheap, but what the people are buying are also the possibility of some nasty virus which is going to wreck their computer. So that's one way of sending viruses through the system, sending it through so-called cracked software, where major pieces of software who rely on codes to activate them, the codes are sent to many users so they can download the free trial of the software and use a code that they've downloaded from their friends or from certain sites, not knowing that that code itself may hold a key to the virus, and which may affect their system and propagate the virus. Availability issues. Availability requires that the communications infrastructure and network systems in place can receive and send information and data and enable electronic transactions to take place. Availability means that the people who are using the network, let's say business community, or using the network for business purposes, the system should be available for them to use. They should be able to access their accounts or send information to customers or communicate with customers or whatever the commercial purpose is. And there may be issues about businesses adopting computer systems, network servers and software and so on, and looking at how reliable these servers and the networks and the software are for business purposes. And the use of viruses destroys confidence in these systems. But of course, that means that businesses themselves suffer. And if businesses suffer, the people who work for the business suffer. Which means jobs will be lost. People's livelihoods will be lost. Their standard of living will be destroyed. Their families may be destroyed. All because of the work of virus writers who write the viruses for no obvious apparent reason. So systems may become non-available because the worry of security, the loss of data, confidentiality, privacy, and so on. Availability issues. Well, the Common Gateway Interface, CGI scripts, are essential for software programs. CGI scripts link servers and software. So CGI is the scripts that are essential for programs to work. The scripts are only are really small servers, and this can create problems in making information too available. Paradoxically, if viruses attack the CGIs are they're trying to make the data and the information and the software, they're trying to make all of that available. Their purpose is to make it available. Well, that may be feeding into the hands of the virus writer, who wants their viruses to be made available. They want their viruses to propagate and to go out and do destruction. CGI scripts are opportunities for exploitable bugs. So virus writers write viruses and they try to use the CGI scripts that are resident on servers and in computers. They try to use these to propagate their own malware, their own viruses and their own malware. The scripts may also leak information about the host system, and this may be an opening for hackers. When hackers try to get into a computer system, they're looking for vulnerability, they're looking for a weak spot, they're looking for a way in, a back door as it's sometimes called. They're looking for a way into the system so that they can plant their virus. Well, the way in may also be the way out, and the CGI scripts are communicating outwards. They're communicating between the server and the recipients. Well, that may also be the way in. So the virus writers try to attack the CGI scripts, get in that way and plant their virus. All online businesses must secure CGI scripts from the above problems. From the problems I've just mentioned, they must try to secure the CGI scripts, and antivirus programs are working hard to ensure that there is security in the servers, that the servers, if they are attacked, they're able to defend themselves, in the sense they're able to close down parts of the system and get remedial treatment, or the server itself is more or less blocked off to the possibility of entry. Having said all of that, the virus writers are persistent. They don't go away. They're always looking for a way in, and if they're so determined, almost inevitably they find their way into a system and will corrupt the system. So we do read about major institutions like banks or government agencies or whoever being attacked from time to time, because if there is a determined community to do it, the chances are they will find a way in every once in a while. To ensure availability, all involved in the data chain must have a clear and effective security policy. It must be the case that everyone who uses a computer system must be aware of security issues. And relying on antivirus providers may not be sufficient. Antivirus providers are very useful in the fight back against the virus writers, but common sense also applies. And as I said earlier, it may be the case that some businesses might need two systems, physically separated. Two physically separated systems. It may be one connecting to the internet, which may be vulnerable and subject to attack, and the other system internal to the business. It's not an ideal solution, but it may be a partial solution and useful for some businesses. There are many examples of hackers disrupting services. Some very famous sites have come under attack in the past, and this shows the need for constant vigilance. The virus writers would really love to attack the White House or to attack the Pentagon, they would love to plant their flag, as psychiatrists say. Plant their flag means they're the ones who broke in, and they can boast to their friends they're the ones who broke the system. That seems to be the only reward that a lot of these get. It's the kudos they get from being able to boast to their colleagues about how they corrupted a particular system. But the Americans are fully aware of this possibility, and they take a lot of very secure steps to protect their systems. We, in Western Europe, for example, we know that banks may be under attack from time to time, or large companies may be attacked. Essentially, any reputable business must be careful about how it uses its system and who has access to the system. As I said, sites that have been attacked: Yahoo, eBay, Hotmail, various banks. And it's likely, given the nature of the problem, that these institutions will continuously come under attack, so they must be continuously dedicating resources to securing their systems. You could say this is all a waste of resource, but it seems to be a necessary use of resources, given that some people are determined to attack and to break the networks. Authentication issues. Well, one way in which some security can be brought into the system is requiring authentication. The recipient must sign in, and the signing in process must be accepted. The receiver needs to know the identity or the identified sender, and needs to know is it really one that's registered? Is it a legitimate person signing in? So it has processes to try and identify who is signing in, and if both sides agree, the information agrees on both sides, then that person will be allowed to access the system. So the simplest one, of course, is using a password. But there's now increasing use of mobile phones and sending texts to mobile phones and authentication codes and so on. It's becoming a little more sophisticated. Probably the most sophisticated is through the use of encryption, where software or parts of software are encrypted and must be accessed with very detailed codes, and perhaps a two-step process where one code is entered online, and then a telephone is used, a secure telephone line is used to send a message, and that message must then also be typed in to gain access to the system. Encryption involves encoding data and then decoding it with an appropriate key. That's what I meant by signing in with perhaps a large and sophisticated code, but also it may be a two-step, as I said earlier, sending information to a phone. Systematic encryption, this involves the user possessing the same decoding key. So the encryption, the key that gains access to the software, the encryption key, must be one that is recognized by the system and held by the person entering, trying to enter that particular piece of software or that particular area of the network. So both sender and receivers must possess the same key. There is something called asymmetric encryption. This uses a public key and is distributed to all using the system. So a whole group of people may have it. The danger with that is that they write it down and lose it, or their wallet is stolen, and it eventually goes back to some virus writer or some hacker who can now gain access to the system. So there's a need for it to be secure. However, a second key, which is private, is given to designated recipients. Only recipients with a private key can encrypt the data. So there may be the possibility of using one general key that's given out to a certain group, but when they enter the key, they're asked for a second code, which only certain people have got. Well, it's a possibility. The person sending the message owns a certificate. This is becoming quite common. It's a digital signature or identification file. This ensures that person sending the file using the public key is who they say they are. So sometimes when we get access to a system, we're asked for the public key. Well, we've got this public key. We've received it when we signed up or when we first became employed by the business. So the public key is what we enter, and then we're asked to send a piece of information which identifies us uniquely. And the chances are that no one else will know what that private piece of information is, that signature or that file or that separate code, and that will gain access to the system. The TCP/IP protocol is not secure, and so-called packet sniffers that listen to TCP/IP traffic may pull down files, codes, documents, or other data passing across the network. Packet sniffers are part of the virus set of tools. They go looking for vulnerabilities in packages that are sent across the network, and if they can find a vulnerability, they will exploit it. So they're constantly looking out at packages of data that's traveling around the internet, traveling around the networks, and if they find a vulnerability, they will exploit it. Restricting access to data may be implemented in three ways. First of all, by specifying the access, saying exactly how people may get in terms of codes and processes that are required, the various steps that are required to get people into the system. Specifying names and passwords. So once the processes of getting in are understood, then the names and the passwords must be used. And it may also be the case that codes and encryptions may be used as I've described above. So this talk is mostly about viruses and attacks on the system, and some of the ways in which security can be strengthened. The fact is, this is an ongoing fight. It's been going on now for years, since the start of the network, and the chances are it's going to go on in perpetuity. It's going to go on forever. But antivirus writers are becoming more sophisticated, and there's a possibility that at some stage the cost of writing the viruses will slow down the process, the sophistication that's required. But having said that, the motivation for the virus writers, the desire to boast amongst their colleagues that they broke into a certain system, or perhaps they're criminals, they want to steal information off the system, or steal resources off the system. If they're just simply straightforward criminals, that motivation is also very powerful. So it's likely that it will continue. It's a pity, but as human beings, this is a characteristic I suppose we possess, sad as it is. That's all we're going to do on this session. We're going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.